Hi, everybody. Good evening. And before I forget to do this at the end, I want to wish all of you a happy Valentine's Day. So kind of enjoy it, and we're all connected to one another. So it's the important part of it. I do want to emphasize something. I want to kind of begin tonight with some sad news. One of our very special people here at Starting Point, Linda Crawley, who for years has done a meditation class here, passed away suddenly on January 31st. It's a sad situation. It was, she has 6 children. She's young. And it was one of those things that just kind of happened suddenly. And so please keep her in your prayers and keep her family in your prayers too, okay? All right, let's just take a moment of silence just to remember her and just say a little prayer inside of ourselves for her. Thank you. I'm going to begin tonight in the second lecture of our series on grief and loss. And tonight I'll be going over the first 3 stages of grieving: anger, denial, anger, and bargaining. Okay, so I want to start by doing a reading from the language of letting go. And I picked a reading from November 2nd on the grief process. To let ourselves wholly grieve our losses is how we surrender to the process of life and recovery. How do we grieve? Awkwardly, imperfectly, usually with a great deal of resistance, often with anger and attempts to negotiate, ultimately by surrendering to the pain. The grief process, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross says, is a 5-stage process: denial, anger, bargaining, sadness, and finally acceptance. That's how we grieve. Although this 5-step process looks tidy on paper, it is not tidy in life. Do not move through it in a series of compartments. We usually flounder through it, kicking and screaming, with much back and forth movement, until we reach that peaceful state called acceptance. When we talk about unfinished business from our past, we're usually referring to losses about which we have not completed grieving. We can learn to understand the grief process and how it applies to recovery. Even good changes in recovery can bring loss and consequently grief. We can learn to help ourselves and others by understanding and becoming familiar with this process. We can learn to fully grieve our losses, feel our pain, accept and forgive, so we can feel joy and love. Today, God, help me open myself to the process of grieving. Help me allow myself to flow through the grief process, accepting all the stages so I might achieve peace and acceptance in my life. Help me learn to be gentle with myself and others while we go through this very human process of healing. I wanted to read that tonight because one of the things I want to do in talking about it and sharing the first 3 stages of grieving, I want to emphasize something that was emphasized in that reading. This is not something we go through easily. These first 3 stages are very many times where a lot of people get stuck for a long period of time. They're very natural, they're very normal, because all of us very many times don't want to have to face things that are a reality in front of us. And many of us spend a long time, hoping that it didn't happen, even though it did happen. Many of us have a tendency to be very angry, and that anger can go in a lot of different directions. Anger at God, anger at institutions, anger at people. Basically, we literally project stuff out to others. Unfortunately, some of us have a tendency to isolate, to pull the anger in, to beat ourselves up, and to go in depression. And so one of the things we have to learn about the grieving process is it's a process that will happen gradually and slowly, but it will happen because most of us will have to struggle through it. There is no easy way, I'm sorry. Yes, we can do the grief process intellectually, and intellectually is not what I'm talking about. It's about getting in touch with your feelings and being able to go to the inside where the real core of your grief is taking place. Otherwise, what happens is we have a tendency to literally try to understand it. I got to say this as strongly as I can. If you ever do come to understand this process, please call me. I want to take you on tour. Nobody understands it. It's a process that we have to go through, although many of us will try to figure it out, try to understand it, but especially if we lose somebody that's very close to us, if a parent loses a child, if a child dies suddenly, things such as drug overdose and things to that effect. We had this happen yesterday to one of our own here at Starting Point, a 22-year-old who died, of drug overdose. And basically, it's a very traumatic situation. And yet so many times we try to even say things to ourselves like, if only I had done this, if only I had said this, if only I didn't do that. We go back and forth, and very many times we beat ourselves up and look at ourselves in a negative way because we feel somehow we could have prevented this from happening. And that's all normal. It's part of that bargaining, negotiating process that we go through because so many of us have a hard time getting in touch with our feelings, getting in touch with our anger. And I want to emphasize this as strongly as I can tonight. Feelings are neither right nor wrong. They're just feelings, and you're allowed to have them. It's okay to feel anger. It's okay to go through changes. But many of us, myself included, have been trained over the years not to get angry. I find it ironical in my own life because I was trained by my mother and my family and my wonderful Italian aunts, who are the most angry people on the face of the earth. I used to salute when they came in the room. I was scared to death of them. And they told me not to get angry. Although, man, they didn't practice what they preached. And then we had these wonderful ladies called nuns who scared the crap out of me and told us also never to get angry. So basically, a lot of stuff was put into us. And then we have a tendency not to be able to feel these feelings and get in touch with them because they're only feelings. But see, many of us take on a lot of guilt, a lot of other things that go along with it. These three stages are so important because so many people stay in these three stages for a long period of time. It's very difficult to go into the sadness stage, or I call it the closure stage. And that's why so many times we have this wheel of grief. We get stuck in these three areas. Remember back in the beginning when I talked about that gentleman planting the seed from the Bible? It was on rock and sandy soil and weeds and thorns. That describes the process of these three stages. And many times we have a tendency not to want to look at things we have to look at. So the easiest thing in the world is to block it. And then freeze it, put it inside. In one of my recovery books, as part of my eating disorder program, they have a beautiful write-up on a thing called, the Iceberg Theory. And the Iceberg Theory is very simple. It's that all of us have all this stuff inside of us that we've had for a long period of time. And especially when we're going through changes, we're going through losses, different things in our life, and we cover it over. And we do it very many times with compulsiveness and addiction and things to that effect because we're scared to go to the core, to go to the center. I know in my own life, I told you this many times, I spent 44 years in the iceberg. Did I function? Sure. Most adult children in codependence I know can function very well in the iceberg because they function externally. But the inside, we never go to look at. We avoid. And that denial pattern can stay for a long period of time, especially if a situation occurs in our life that we're pretty angry about, but we're not allowed to have anger. And yet we're allowed to have feelings. I always tell the story. My mother was the addict in my family. And I can remember at times, I joke about this today, driving across the Ben Franklin Bridge, and I figured I'd just open the door and push her out. I just solved the addiction problem. Well, that's called a feeling. If I open the door and push her out, I go to jail. But the bottom line is, even though those feelings come up inside of you, anybody who lived with an addict will tell you that. It's almost like, go away. I don't want to deal with this. At the same time, I love you and I care about you. There's all these conflicting things that go on inside of us. And that's why a lot of times we don't realize it. We start the grieving process sometimes way before situations that actually occur. Especially when it comes to change, when it comes to age, when it comes to moving to different stages of life. You know, the hardest thing in the world is to say goodbye to the past and move forward. We see this in the pandemic. You know, we've gone through a tremendous amount of issues over the past 2.5 years, a lot of changes. Look what we're doing today. And as a result, then, to work our way back into what we refer to as normal, we're not going to go back to what it was before. There will now be a new normal. That new normal will have to adjust to. That's why I've told you so many times, one of my favorite words in the spiritual concept is the word adjustment. The hardest thing in life is to adjust to new ways, new way of life, a new way of doing things. In my own life, I realize this as I get older, there's so many things I can't do anymore. When I was a young man, way back in my 30s and 40s, you know, I was prison chaplain, I was running halfway houses, I was driving all the countryside, doing all kinds of stuff, involved in everything. I was like a dynamo out of control. Now, guess what? I can't do that anymore. I'm ready for bed at 8:30 at night. My life has changed dramatically. I know that stuff was glamorous and wonderful. I can look back on history and stuff that I did, but I can't go back and do that today. I look at the beginnings of Starting Point with the halfway house. You know, I can't go back and do that. I don't have that kind of energy anymore. And there's a kind of loss in that. It's almost like you have to be able to come to an acceptance of that. And believe me, acceptance does not come easy, because we will fight, battle. We see this in people going through midlife crisis. You know, they want to go back and be 20 again. They're not going to go back and be 20 again. They try to act that way. They try to dress that way, get fancy cars, do all kinds of stuff, think they can go back and just try. It doesn't work. Even though we'll try and drive ourselves crazy and they go nuts in the process, but it doesn't work. And that's why transition and change, moving on, even in relationships, I've told this many times, relationships are always in a process of changing. You know, I did a lot of weddings in my life, a lot of weddings. I probably passed the 200 mark someplace in there. And I have these beautiful people standing in front of me, and they always say, I promise to love you the way I love you today to the day I die. I have to shoot them before they leave the altar. As soon as they turn around and walk down the aisle, it's changed already. And then the invaders come along. They're called children, by the way. Changes everything again. Right, Heather? It's all part of it. You come right down to it. Everything's always changing. Even addicts know what I'm talking about. Because literally, we're so used to our addiction, we come into recovery, and recovery is strange. Recovery is like starting all over again. Recovery is like moving in new directions. It's scary. And yet it's scary and beautiful at the same time. I've learned something about the process of grieving. It's scary, and yet it's beautiful. It's a process of change. And change is part of life. But see, if we don't want to be able to accept this, and we fight it and we battle it, we get into trouble. One of the gentlemen I worked with for years, God rest his soul, it's sad. Okay, here's a gentleman that was sexually abused by his mother, by a clergyman, and spent his whole entire life constantly trying to either negotiate with the church, negotiate back and forth, being angry at them, blaming, going all kinds of changes, angry, and literally wanted more and more and more, do this, do that, demanding. He had spent his life doing this. I tried working with him for a long period of time. He just could not let it go. Even after they died, he still was angry at them and still wanted them to admit to what they did. even though they were no longer here. And so what did he do? He blamed the people in the church now. He kept the process going. He ended up with 3 different heart attacks. He ended up dying young. He ended up with all kinds of physical ailments. Because I really believe if we repress our feelings and hold our feelings in, it's going to affect us physically. It'll affect our body. And the hardest thing in the world to do is to move forward and let go of the old and say goodbye to it. It's not easy to say goodbye. People in relationships know what I'm talking about. You know, you can logically end a relationship and be happy you're out of it, but you're angry. You're angry because you invested time in it. You're angry because it didn't work. You're angry because you had to go through a change in your life. It's the same thing when somebody dies. Even though we may say things like, well, they were suffering, at least they're at peace now. These are nice things that we say. But in reality, I don't want them to die. I begin to negotiate deep down inside. You know why? So what do? I get angry at God. I can't get angry at them, although I should get angry at them for leaving you. But see, why should I get angry at somebody who died for leaving me? See, I can be angry at someone and love them. They're one of the hardest principles around. I can feel these feelings and still have love for them. I love my mother, but it's okay for me to feel anger and feel frustration over things that occurred. It's okay. And this is hard for us to give ourselves permission to do this. That's why in the grieving process, we're going to go in that negotiating stage. We're going to go through trying to figure out why things happened. You know, I don't know about you, but if you want a nice headache, you want a lot of agita and make yourself half crazy, try to figure out why things happen. And we have a hard time accepting them because we're going to somehow find out the reason. That in reality, we're not going to find out the reason. It's the struggle we have to go through. It's the things we have to experience. That's why the first 3 stages are so important, because very many times it's like running a gauntlet. We're going to go back and forth between denial, between anger, between bargaining, and sometimes we'll mix all 3 of them together in a mixing bowl. We'll be negotiating, getting angry, and going through changes and stuff to this effect. A good example is a gentleman that I knew, his family invited me over to do an intervention. I met with them, and at the end of the intervention, they said, well, we know he's got a drug problem, but it's not his fault. It's because of the people he hangs around with. They're the ones. You should do the intervention on them, not on him. And as a result, I know where they're at. They're going through a grieving process over the loss of their son, even though their son may still be alive. And they can't face it. They don't want to deal with it. So it's easier to blame somebody else. It's easier to go somebody. And I especially know what I'm talking about. When you're active addiction, the blame game is wonderful. I have to blame somebody else for what I'm doing, because I don't want to have to be in touch with my feelings. I run away. So the same thing when we lose somebody. That's why sometimes it's good to be able to spend time with someone before they die, to be with them at their deathbed. Some of you here have experienced that, because you actually are participating in the grieving process before they leave you. You have time to say goodbye. You have time to do closure. That's important. And yet so many times in life, that's taken away from us. And that's one of the reasons why we stay stuck in those first 3 stages. We go back and forth in those stages because that's been taken away from us. You know, we need to be able to be with people. You know, I just to put a bit of humor into this tonight, I want to tell you the story of my neighbor. I always love telling her story. You know, her husband was one of these real boisterous Irish guys who liked to tell jokes all the time and fool around all the time. It was always a life of the party, you know. And he ended up having a stroke. He got pretty sick, and he was sick for a long period of time. And he ended up on a ventilator. And as a result, you know, it got to a point where they realized he was brain dead. So the family was with him. They spent time with him. They did closure with him. They finally were able to let him go. And so they removed the apparatus. The family gathered around the bed. They were saying the rosary together and praying together, you know, and just being able to say goodbye to the person they loved. And right before he died, he popped his head up and said, bye, put his head back down again. And she told me that story over and over and over again. And yet that was his spirit. His spirit could feel the energy of their prayers, the energy of the stuff around them. And so the spirit had to be able to just acknowledge it. But it got acknowledged in the same humor he had when he was alive. And you know, you can smile at that, you look at that, but you know, I really believe in the gift of our spirit. And what happens so many times is when things happen suddenly, accidents, overdoses, whatever happens in life, or sometimes we have to go through the grieving process of, you know, being told we're going to lose something, or being told we have a disease or a sickness. We think we're doing okay, and we feel these feelings, and we go in and they tell us, well, I hate to tell you this, you only have a year to live. And there's a real sadness that occurs in that. And yet at the same time, anger occurs in it, and frustration occurs in it. And as a result, then you have to be able to figure out a way to make it longer than a year. So you try everything possible, you negotiate, you go through all kinds of changes because you're not ready to accept things yet. That's why I've said to you so many times, acceptance is a powerful process, and it takes a lot of time. Nobody just comes to acceptance. I'm sorry. Yeah, intellectually, I can come to acceptance. I've told this to you 50 times. I wish when I go to heaven, I'm going to talk to God and say, I got a gripe with you, mister, or lady, whoever you happen to be. I got a gripe with you. When you created us, you should have created with an off-on switch up here so I can shut it off and break it. This thing drives me crazy sometimes because so many times I'm trying to figure out, why is this happening? Why are these things happening to me? Why am I going through changes? Why don't things stay the same? Why can't I get to a stable area in my life? Well, it's not supposed to be that way. See, life is a process. Life is that up and down process of growth and movement. I said this before, if you ever want to really check about life and understand life, go to a heart station, hook yourself up to a heart monitor, and pray it goes like this. Because if it goes like this, you got a definite problem. That's not life is supposed to be. Because you're going to go through physical changes, emotional changes, spiritual changes, growth changes, social changes, things in life. Everything changes on a constant basis. It's one of the reasons why I have such a love for the big book of AA. Because I know the wisdom behind the people that put that together. Infinite wisdom. I know God was with them. There had to be a higher source working with them. Because you'll notice something about the big book. There are no absolutes in the big book. Everything is suggested. Everything is suggested. And they tell you to take what you can use and leave the rest. They're giving you a suggested process to go through life. And yet we are the ones, because we're human, we are the ones who make things absolute. One thing's always to be one way all the time. And then when change occurs, we get upset and we go through changes because we don't know how to handle it. I've learned over and over again in my life that constant process of change in my physical body, in my emotional body. You know, I can't drive too much at nighttime anymore. I lose concentration with the markings and stuff on the road and everything. I used to be able to zip around like a nut. Well, I do too much zipping anymore. That's why I cherish daylight. But it's part of the process of life. It's part of change. You have to come to an acceptance of what you can do, what you can't do, of the reality. And yet you have to grieve stuff that you lose. Loss is part of life. I look at my family, and it's sad. I love my cousins. My cousins and I have been close for a long period of time. And at one time we had over 15 or 16 of them. Now there's only about 3 of us left. And now I'm the patriarch. That's scary enough. But the bottom line is things keep changing. We keep losing people. And some of them we lost at a very young age. There's a sadness in that. And I'm grateful to the recovery program because it helped me to be able to grieve. I grieve my father's death all the time. I love my dad. But it took me years and years and years to get in touch with that, to really begin to be connected to my pop, to begin to understand things. And I have all these wonderful memories and stuff I can connect with today, because today I've built a different relationship with him. And that's the secret to the process of growth. I'll get more of that next week when I get into sadness, I get into acceptance, because we have to come to a new relationship. If we lose someone, we have to build a new relationship with them, a relationship with their spirit, with their energy, who they are. They didn't leave us. They have transitioned. And so as a result, then we have to be able to somehow keep them in here, keep them connected to us, let them be part of us, even though we're angry because they're not here anymore. It's not easy. I admire Pat Opes, who's our grief therapist. She only works with parents who have lost children. And one of the things I love about her is it takes a long period of time to work through this process. And that's why I say to you, and I say it to myself, you can't do it alone. You can't do it alone. You need people to process this stuff with, to work through it with. We need help. We need support. Because you know what happens if we try to do it alone? Everything shuts down. A good example of this, just to give you an example, I know people that were able to be very productive, do all kinds of things. And then all of a sudden, when the pandemic came along, they went into a total state of fear. And instead of being able to work things into a new direction, they went into isolation, they went into depression, they began to shut down, they began to close off. And it's almost like they don't know how to handle what's happening. And as a result, then they have to do one of 3 things. Either make believe it's not happening, or put themselves into a hole, or finally process the fact that it is happening, and then go through the change process and the adjustment process to a new way of life. I mean, the first time I heard about Zoom, my first reaction was this: get away from me. I ain't dealing with this stuff. And now, look at me. I Zoom with you guys. I get to meet my fantastic people all the time. I go to my 12-step meetings on Zoom. I have friends now from all different parts of the country. I'm doing some step work with another person from California. I'm doing all kinds of neat stuff we're working on together. It's pretty neat. I get to meet people I never would have met. In my home group, in my eating disorder program, we have a person in our home group from Great Britain who's on every week with us. It's fantastic. I never thought that would ever happen in my life. And so now what I have to do is, once I was able to come to a sense of things are new, a new way of doing things, I was able to open up the doors and look at things in different ways. If rehabs want me to give a talk, guess what? I'll do it on Zoom. I'm still there. It's all part of it. And that's okay. But years ago, I never would have did that. I would have felt ashamed to do that. Went through a lot of changes. But I'm realizing over and over again that I've got to make adjustments in my life. You got to make adjustments in your life. It's a constant process we're going through. And aging is a big part of this too. It's okay to go through the aging process, even though I know They have all these creams and stuff out today that you're going to anti-aging this, that's a load of crap. You're going to still age. Okay, so that's all right. You just take all that stuff off, you're still aging. Your hair turns white. I mean, look at Ray's hair. At least he's got hair. Not a problem. I mean, but Walt and I were a little different, in a different place, and Charlie too. The top here is a little bare. So I even have to wear a hat to bed at night because it's cold. I did it when I was a kid, and now I'm doing it again. It's totally amazing. It's the fun part of it. I was at work the other day. I was cold up, so I put my little skull cap on, and I was walking around like that all day. And people said, "God, you look cute." I said, "Thank you." I don't care because I know it's a change process. I feel it more now than I felt it before. It's all part of life. You come down to it, and that's why it's important in the grieving process is to realize you're going to get stuck in these 3 stages. Every one of us gets stuck in it. We got to go through that process of negotiating. Got to go through that process of being angry. Got to go through that process until we're ready to move on. Now, don't ask me, when will I be ready? I can't answer that. You'll be ready when you're ready. And that's okay. And some people, it takes a long time to be ready. Some are ready sooner. Some have gone through a lot of it already. Everybody's different. And our process is different. Whatever your feelings are, feel them. Be in touch with them. Process them, because if you stuff them and keep them in, they're going to bury you. That's how depression develops in your life. Then we beat ourselves up. We're hard on ourselves. We blame ourselves and go through all kinds of changes. And yet we're going to do that. I know it. I've done it. We all do it. I beat the hell out of myself for a long time before I made some major decisions in my life and major changes. Even though I had that wonderful disease called I know, the I know disease. People will say to me, "Don't you?" I know, yeah, I got it. I'll take care of it. I wasn't ready. And that's okay. That's why I don't tell anybody, "Oh, you're grieving." I'm working with a gentleman right now. I've been working with him for a long time. And, he goes through this constantly. And he's going through a grieving process over the loss of a relationship. And he keeps saying to me, "When am I going to get through it, Vince? When am I going to get through it?" I says, "When you're ready to get through it." Well, that's not much of an answer. I said, "Well, it's the only answer I can give you, because I can't answer for you. And you have to be able to go through that process, because the hardest thing for us to do is to go into that state of sadness." I have a nickname for that. It's called the death stage. See, I truly believe that we die many times before we die physically. And what is death? It's an ending. That's all it is. And therefore, in life, in order for us to move forward, we have to be able to do closure, to bring things to a conclusion so we can move on. That's why acceptance only comes when we're able to feel the sadness, feel the hurt, feel these things, and finally go through the process of closure. I want to spend a lot of time on that next week, because the most important part of the grieving process, the sadness stage. It's a stage we all have to go through. And that goes for every element of life. That goes for lifestyle changes, that goes for jobs, that goes for relationships. Even in relationships, they're always in process of changing. I mean, I love Hallmark, okay, but come on. It's wonderful. It's great. That's why they got to do a sequel on what happens after they find the magic. So it's all right. I keep telling them, "Come on, where's the sequel? Where's the sequel? Where do they come into reality? Where do they?" I love it. Only place in the world where we can decorate a Christmas tree in 33 seconds. It's unbelievable. But that's okay. You need that in your life. You need diversions and things to that effect. That's why you can't be always in this process of figuring things out. Sometimes you need diversion. You got to put it away for a while. Let things happen. And I really believe in this very deeply. The hardest thing in life is to let go. It's the hardest thing in life to do, to let go and to move on. Whew. That's painful, and yet it's important. It's a big part of our growth process we have to go through in life. That's why tonight in my prayer, I want to just urge all of us to simply ask the God of your presence, the God of your higher power, the God that is connected to you, to guide you and help you in this process. He created us as human beings, as people with human elements inside of us. He created us fragile to go through hurt and go through changes. But try to realize that we have to go through it, which is so important. And don't be afraid, even though you will be afraid. I love saying that. Don't be afraid, but you will be afraid. Don't struggle, but you will struggle. It's what it's all about. And those people that have left us, passed on, they haven't left us. They're right here. They're connected. We're all connected to one another. I'm a lot closer to my mom and dad now than I was when they were alive. Isn't that amazing? I feel so much closer to them now. I actually have conversations with them. We spend time talking together. And they answer me. It's in me, it's my spirit. So I realize more and more it's part of the journey. And isn't it interesting sometimes how you can hear things and then you learn later on? The Serenity Prayer says the wisdom to know the difference. The wisdom only comes with time. It comes with experience. It comes with struggle. It comes through going things. That's why I love the grieving process, and I call it the process of life. Because I don't care who we are, we're going to experience this process every day of our life, because we're always going through some sort of change. And that's what we have to feel. It's okay to cry. It's okay to feel. It's okay. Just whatever's going on, just be it. But ask for help. Ask for guidance. Process it with somebody. Ask for a hug from somebody. Just, get connected. That's important. Don't try doing things by yourself. You need people in your life. I know how important that is. It's a big part of the journey. And so as we pray tonight, let's pray that we hope and pray that as we go through this process, we're able to somehow, some way, work our way through it. But in our own time, and when we're ready, we can move forward. So let us pray. God of my understanding, my higher power, my higher presence, I come to you and I ask for your guidance. I ask for your direction. I ask that you be with me, walk with us, and help me on this journey. Know that each and every one of us are on this earth, that we're walking the journey of this life, that we're going to go through our struggles, and thank you for them. Hopefully we can grow, we can learn, we can continue in the process of growing and learning, discovering new things about ourselves. Teach us to realize that things in life that we experience that sometimes we get scared and afraid of might be the most beautiful things necessary for us on our journey. Help us to walk through our losses. Remember those who have gone before us. Never forget them. They're part of our family. We are connected to one another. Those that we remember and those maybe that were part of our life that maybe we don't even remember them anymore now, but they're still there. They're all part of the journey we're on together. We are family. We are connected. And our struggles belong to us. Teach us to share them with each other, stay close to each other, and constantly every day ask for your guidance and ask for your direction. And thank you for the gift of life. Thank you for the gift of struggle. Thank you for the gift each day of each person that touches us in our life. And help us to live their spirit inside of each and every one of us. We pray and we ask this every day, and pray this in your name. Amen. And now I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, and unmuting yourself. And Patty, I think you're here, so there you are. Pat's going to lead us in our wonderful wee version of the Serenity Prayer.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God's will, not mine, be done.